as Ms. Klimas says, actually have it in the spring where we can avoid all these different issues of snow days. So we'll think about the best way to do this. So again, welcome for being here. I will keep my remarks also short, like Dr. Carrick did, because what's really important is that you get a chance to see the kind of science that we're funding here. Dr. Carrick briefed this slide to you, and I just want to point out a couple of things. We try to fund the best and the brightest, and we try to catch them early on. And if you look at the two pictures in the middle of the right-hand part of the slide, on Dr. David Wineland on the far right is a 2012 Nobel Prize winner in physics. Dr. Peter Higgs is on the next to him, 2013 Nobel Prize in Physics. Both of them we funded early on in their careers. Dr. Wineland, just shortly after he got started, the Office of Naval Research and AFOSR both funded him to do his work. That has now expanded and led to him getting the Nobel Prize last year. Peter Higgs, we started funding him back in the early 60s when he did the seminal work that then the next 40 or so years people spent time trying to find the Higgs boson and found it, and he got the Nobel Prize as well. So we try to find these people early, fund them early, so they can do research that's relevant to the Air Force. I want to point out to you a couple of documents that are available on the APAN website. If you've logged on to the website where you get to the spring review slides, you'll find that this document is available. You can click on the link on that page and then download it. This is the monograph that we put together to celebrate 60 years of AFOSR that our anniversary was a couple of years ago. There's a lot of good information in there, especially what I like about it is it goes decade by decade and identifies some of the key technologies that we invested in and their impact today. AFOSR invests primarily for the long term. We look for the revolutionary capabilities that can impact the Air Force 10, 20 years down the road in general. So if you go through that and you look at the various decades, you'll see what we invested in. Like in the 1950s, we invested in basic foundational mathematical research underlying stealth technology. In the 60s, we invested in the basic research underlying how can we use computers not just as number crunchers, but as enablers for all kinds of calculations, all kinds of interactions that we need, and so on and so forth. Each decade has a number of these areas of research that we invested in that have made a huge impact in the Air Force and in the nation. Now, we weren't the only ones investing in them. We have a finite budget. Other people invested in them as well, but you'll see that there are a number of things that we invested in that have made a big impact for our nation. Similarly, we have a technical strategic plan, a document that's also available on the website that you can download. I urge you to look through it. It gives you an idea of what we invest in and why we're investing in it. It gives you an overview of what the structure of AFOSR is. It gives you an overview of the departments that Dr. Carrick already talked about. What I want to point out is the mission, because I'm going to contrast this mission on the next slide with the NSF mission. So our mission, you see that there are three verbs there. There's discover, there's shape, and there's champion. And what you'll notice about those verbs is that they're very active verbs. Discover, we don't wait for the cool technology to come to us, for people to come to us and say, look what we have. But instead, in addition to that, we spend time going out and identifying what might be the relevant technologies. I'll riff on what Dr. Carrick said, cold atom technology. Back 10, 15 years ago, we looked at that and realized that could have great promise for doing a GPS-denied environment navigation. And so we went out to the experts in the field, in the academic institutes, and realized that potential, and so based on that then we realized this is something that we wanted to shape for the Air Force. And so a program manager many years ago then went to the Air Force Research Laboratory and said, this is a technology that we think is important. We want to help you stand up a capability to do this kind of research. And so we invested in them. They weren't already doing that. We built up that capability, and so that is one way we have shaped this area. And then championing it finally, is how do we move it on? Once it's become effective, how do we move it on to the next level to go to the applied research, the developmental? And we have championed this so that now we have a small company that is taking this technology and making it going further on to being able to be used in real-world environments. So that's just one example about how we actively seek to identify, shape, and to move on technology that we fund. We're not the National Science Foundation. These are the two mission statements. So you can see what our mission statement is, the NSF mission statement. You see that they do have a line relating to defense, but they also have many other areas. And in fact, the last bullet tells you that they're willing to fund many, many, many things that could be relevant to the nation. We are more focused. We are a DoD organization, and more specifically, we're an Air Force organization, and we seek to find and fund technologies that will be relevant to the future Air Force. The National Science Foundation has a much broader scope of what they fund. And in addition, our program officers tend to have more say-so in the kind of work that we fund. The National Science Foundation has panels that review proposals and come to consensus on what to propose, whereas the AFOSR takes that kind of input, but ultimately our program officers make the final decision. And so we ask our program officers to search for those transformational opportunities, not just incremental opportunities. We're looking to make leaps ahead in the kind of technology that can make a difference to the Air Force. We look all over the place to do that. We look at the opportunities that we would have for the Air Force needs, and we look at what their needs are and try to identify the basic research that's relevant to addressing those needs. And we look across the world. You're going to hear talks from people from our London office, from our Tokyo office, from our Santiago, Chile office, as well as here in Arlington, on how we look across the world, not just nationally. We try to balance our investments as a combination of depth and breadth. So we want to invest across the broad spectrum of technologies that are relevant to the Air Force with targeted areas of depth where we want to really make a difference and be leaders in those areas. We stay aware of what the other agencies are funding so that if we do fund in areas similar to theirs, it's intentional, it's done so that we can actually either fund technology that's more specific to the Air Force or whatever else makes sense as we collaborate with those agencies. Now I want to get back to the strategic plan. Last year when I briefed you, I told you about our strategic plan, that we were in the process of updating it. The plan that I briefed you on last year was done in 2009. A lot of changes have occurred since then, both in the structure of AFOSR as well as the overall guidance that we use to identify what our strategic plan should have. And so you'll see these kind of topics addressed in the strategic plan, so I urge you to download and look at it. I just want to comment briefly that we do look at national guidance. Dr. Carrick showed you some ideas of some of the national guidance. What I want to point out is that we really have three main areas of guidance that we take. First of all, what is the general guidance on what the nation needs, on what the DoD needs, what the Air Force needs? And so we have a number of documents. For example, the last one on that column, it's the Air Force core functions. Those are the foundational missions that the Air Force is responsible for executing. So we look at those. We look at those and try to understand what kind of basic research would be relevant to those. Second of all, we look at what S&T areas are relevant to the Air Force. And in that middle category, you'll see a number of documents listed, not all the ones we look at. A number of those come from the Air Force Chief Scientist Office. They issued a number of studies that identified what kind of technologies are relevant. But we're not just passive in that. We don't just take that input in a one-way flow. In those Air Force Chief Scientist studies, we played a big role. We headed up much of the document studies. We wrote part of the documents so that we help inform them as well as them informing us. And finally, we take feedback from reviews. The Defense Science Board reviewed the overall Office of the Secretary of Defense Basic Research Mission a couple of years ago. We've looked at ways to implement recommendations from that, and you're going to hear from Dr. Ma in a little bit, and she's going to talk about one of those recommendations that we're going to follow. We get reviewed by the Science Advisory Board, and in fact, we just had that done last week, so we've got 2 weeks of briefings. We've dry run those, and so we've got people up here that have already prepared their talks, and they'll be giving it at second time. We take feedback from that and use that to help guide our portfolio. And then finally, the spring review. Out in the audience here, we have a number of people that are watching this. They're taking notes, they're giving feedback. Chief scientists from the Air Force Major Commands, chief scientists from the Air Force Research Laboratory, people across the DoD. We have people from the Office of Naval Research here. We have people from the Army Research Lab, Army Research Office. So we have a variety of people that give us feedback to help us understand better how our portfolio fits with theirs and to maximize our investments compared to what's being done by other people. Now, Dr. Carrick mentioned to you that we have 5 departments now. He showed you a list of topics that they address. I have a subset of those topics here. Because you've already heard about that and because you have it in the slides and you have in more detail in the technical plan, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is that the Air Force Research Laboratory has their own fellow program, like professional societies have fellow programs. We have no more than 4% of our science and engineering people in the laboratory that can be identified as fellows, and no more than 0.2% per year can be elected. Of our department chairs, 3 of the 5 are Air Force Fellows. One here, you see Dr. Pat Roach, who joined us a little over a year ago. In fact, roughly the same time I joined, was elected to a fellow last year. Dr. Hugh DeLong has been a fellow for a number of years, since 2006. And then another new one from last year, Dr. John Schmischer, who became a fellow. So you'll hear all of these department chairs introducing their departments. I point this out to you to let you know that we have high quality people who know their stuff in charge of their departments. And so they enjoy your feedback, they enjoy getting your insights into what to pursue, and in addition, with their expertise, we have really great departments. I want to take just one slide to talk about our intramural program. We fund both externally, as Dr. Carrick talked about, universities, industry, but we also fund our AFRL technical directorates. We're part of AFRL as a technical directorate, but all the other technical directorates execute research, whereas we just fund research. So part of what we do is we identify with them what are some key basic research proposals that they want to execute, and then we work through their chief scientists and through our chief scientists here, myself and the senior people at AFOSR, to identify what are the right basic research proposals to fund. So we work interactively with them and we fund these proposals every year. It covers the core of our budget that we fund AFRL with. But we also do other things. We do workforce development, and so we have something called the National Research Council postdoc program. Those of you that are listening, if you're interested in being involved in working with AFRL as a postdoc and you're a U.S. citizen, this is an opportunity for you. I urge you to look through the broad agency announcement that we have out there on grants.gov, or contact any of the program officers here and find out more about that. Contact the people at the tech directorates if you know some directly. Great opportunities. We enjoy getting that fresh blood in. The Basic Research Initiative Program is something where we generate topics internally, float them up through for technical quality at AFOSR and through the chief scientists across the Air Force and across the DoD. We get insights, and then based upon that we fund those proposals that we think are relevant and have a potential for giving us a new capability for the Air Force. We've just finished that process. The topics, the external community, this is not for AFRL, this is for people from the universities and industry to propose against. I've just been put out in our new broad agency announcement. These are the 7 of them. I won't go through them, but you can read them. And then finally, I just want to summarize again. You see what our vision is, that we want the Air Force to be enabled to do its mission in the future because of revolutionary advances that we've brought about through basic research. Our mission, we're very active. The updated technical strategic plan, if you have the old one from last year, you can now download this. And again, I urge you, download the 60th anniversary monograph. It's a fascinating read for the kind of things we've funded over so many decades. Thank you. So we'll move on without questions at this point, just to get back on schedule as best we can. But I will be around, and Dr. Carrick will be around at the breaks, and we'll be glad to answer questions for you.